Preston walked into the Diamond Gala with a Mistress on his arm and a smirk on his face, convinced he was the king of the world. He treated his wife Vivian like a ghost, someone to cook his meals and stay hidden while he played the big shot. But Preston made a fatal calculation. He didn't know that the exclusive invitation in his pocket wasn't just luck, it was a trap. He thought he was the guest of honor, but tonight he is just the entertainment. Because the woman he left at home doesn't just wash his shirts, she owns the very ground he's standing on. The rain lashed against the windows of the suburban colonial house in Greenwich, Connecticut. Inside, the atmosphere was even colder. Preston adjusted his silk tie in the hallway mirror, admiring the sharp cut of his tuxedo. It was a Brioni custom-fitted, costing more than most people's cars. He turned his head slightly, catching his profile. Perfect. He looked every inch the successful venture capitalist he pretended to be. "Vivian," he barked, not bothering to turn around. "Where are my cufflinks, the onyx ones?" Vivian emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a simple cotton apron. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a faded grey sweater that had seen better days. To anyone looking in, she was the picture of a weary, subservient housewife. "They are on the dresser, Preston, right where you left them last night," she said softly, her voice devoid of anger but heavy with fatigue. Preston scoffed, storming past her to grab the small velvet box from the side table. "I shouldn't have to hunt for things in my own house. You have one job, Vivian. One job. Keep this place running while I go out and build our future." Vivian watched him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. "Is that what you're doing tonight, building our future?" Preston froze. He turned slowly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "It's the Archdale Diamond Gala Vivian, the most exclusive event in New York. Tickets are $5,000 a plate. I'm meeting investors. Serious people. Not that you would understand the intricacies of high finance." He didn't mention that the second ticket in his pocket wasn't for her. It was for Tiffany, his 24-year-old assistant, with a taste for Cartier, and a laugh that grated on Vivian's nerves like sandpaper. "I see," Vivian said, "and I assume I'm not invited." Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You look at you, Vivian. You're wearing a sweater from a discount rack. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in a room with the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts. You'd embarrass me. No, stay here. Make sure the cleaning lady actually dusts the library this time." He checked his Rolex, a gift Vivian had bought him for their 5th anniversary, though he told everyone he bought it with his bonus. "I'll be late. Don't wait up." He grabbed his coat and stormed out into the rain. The heavy oak door slammed shut, shaking the picture frames on the wall. Vivian stood in the hallway for a long moment. The silence of the house settled around her. Slowly she untied her apron and let it drop to the floor. She walked over to the mirror where Preston had just stood. She pulled the hair tie from her bun, letting her dark, wavy hair cascade over her shoulders. She reached into the pocket of her faded jeans and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the cracked iPhone Preston allowed her to have. It was a sleek encrypted device made of titanium. She dialed a single number. "Benedict," she said, her voice completely changing. The weariness was gone, replaced by a tone of icy command. "He just left." "We are ready for you, madame," a crisp British voice answered. "The car is 2 streets over. Shall I initiate the security protocol for the gala?" "Yes," Vivian said, staring at her reflection. Her eyes were sharp, dangerous. "And Benedict. Make sure the security team knows not to stop Preston at the door. I want him inside. I want him to feel comfortable. I want him to climb as high as he can, so the fall breaks every bone in his body." "Understood. The board is awaiting your arrival. They are anxious to meet the majority shareholder of the Aurora Group in person finally. Vivian hung up. She walked up the stairs, not to the master bedroom she shared with Preston, but to the locked room at the end of the hall, the one Preston thought was storage. She keyed in a code. The door clicked open. Inside there were no dusty boxes. Instead, hanging in the center of the room, was a gown of midnight blue silk, hand-stitched with crushed diamonds that caught the dim light like stars. Beside it sat a jewelry case containing the heart of the ocean's rival, a sapphire and diamond set worth $12 million. Preston thought he was going to a party. He didn't realize he was walking into his own execution. The grand ballroom of the Archdale Hotel in Manhattan was a cathedral of opulence. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the gold-leafed ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the city's elite. Waiters in white gloves moved like silent phantoms, carrying trays of champagne and caviar. Preston stepped out of his leased Mercedes at the valet stand, feeling the rush of adrenaline. On his arm was Tiffany. She was wearing a bright red dress that was a little too tight, a little too short, and entirely too loud for an event of this caliber. But Preston didn't care. She was young, she was blonde, and she looked at him like he was a god. "Oh my God, Preston," Tiffany squealed, clutching his arm. "Look at those lights. Is that the mayor?" "Keep your voice down, Tiff," Preston muttered, though he puffed his chest out. "Act like you belong here. I'm a VIP." He straightened his jacket and walked toward the entrance. The security guard, a towering man with an earpiece, looked down at the guest list. "Name, Preston Sterling," he said, confidently using his middle name as a surname, a habit he developed when trying to sound old money. +1. The guard scanned the list. He paused. He looked at Preston, then at the tablet, then back at Preston. A strange look crossed his face, almost like pity. "Right this way, Mr. Sterling. You have a table near the front." Preston smirked at Tiffany. "See near the front. That's power, babe." They swept inside. The room was already buzzing. Preston scanned the crowd, desperate to lock eyes with anyone important. He spotted Grant Holloway, a rival investor who had beaten him out of a tech deal last month. Grant was talking to a group of elderly men in tuxedos. Preston steered Tiffany toward them. "Grant, good to see you." Grant turned his eyes, narrowing slightly, as he took in Preston and the flashing red beacon that was Tiffany. "Preston, didn't think you made the cut for this list. It's invite only for the founding members and their guests." "I have my connections," Preston lied smoothly. "This is Tiffany." "Charmed," Grant said dryly, barely looking at her. "We were just discussing the rumors about the Aurora Group. Word is the elusive owner is finally making an appearance tonight." Preston laughed. "The Aurora Group, please. It's probably some old guy in a wheelchair living in Switzerland. I heard the company is just a shell for money laundering." The group of elderly men went silent. One of them, a man with silver hair and a monocle, turned to Preston. "I would be careful with your speculations, young man," the silver-haired man said. "The Aurora Group owns this hotel. And the bank that holds your mortgage, likely." Preston waved a hand dismissively. "I know finance, sir. I know when a company is a ghost. Aurora has no face. That means they have no power." Grant smirked, taking a sip of his drink. "If you say so, Preston. By the way, where is your wife, Vivian, wasn't it?" Preston rolled his eyes. "Vivian. Oh, she's at home. She's not really cut out for this world. Sweet girl, but very simple. She thinks a Pinot Grigio from the grocery store is fine wine. You know how it is." Tiffany giggled. "She sounds adorable. like a little mouse." "Exactly," Preston agreed, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "A mouse. I need a lioness." He squeezed Tiffany's waist. Suddenly the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The murmurs of the crowd died down as a spotlight hit the grand staircase at the far end of the room. The Master of Ceremonies, a famous British actor, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed. "Thank you for joining us for the 50th Annual Diamond Gala. Tonight is a special night. For decades, the Aurora Group has funded charities, hospitals, and the arts from the shadows. Tonight, the chairwoman has decided to step into the light to announce the new global initiative." Preston whispered to Tiffany, "Watch, it's going to be some fat old lady in a muumuu." "Please welcome," the announcer continued, "the owner of the Aurora Group, Madame Vivienne Sinclair." Preston froze. The glass of champagne slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Sinclair. That was Vivienne's maiden name. But that was impossible. Her father was a mechanic in Ohio. He had met him. He had seen the grease under his fingernails. The double doors at the top of the staircase swung open. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a midnight blue gown that seemed to absorb the light and throw it back as fire. Diamonds glittered on her throat, her ears, her wrists. Her hair was a cascading river of dark silk. She stood tall, regal, radiating a power so intense it made the air in the room feel heavy. She began to descend the stairs. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. Preston squinted. He couldn't breathe. He knew that walk. He knew the curve of that jaw. But the woman walking down the stairs wasn't the woman who scrubbed his floors. This was a queen. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked straight toward the center of the room, flanked by 4 security guards, and a man Preston recognized, Benedict, the CEO of the largest private bank in London. Vivienne stopped 10 feet away from where Preston stood, paralyzed with Tiffany, clinging to his arm in confusion. Vivienne didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight at Preston. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator who had just cornered its prey. Who is that?" Tiffany whispered, intimidated by the sheer aura of the woman. Grant Holloway, standing next to Preston, began to clap slowly. Then he leaned in and whispered into Preston's ear, "I think, Preston, that is the mouse you left at home." Vivienne raised a hand, and the room went deathly silent. A microphone was handed to her. Her voice rang out, clear and commanding, the voice of a woman who commanded billions. "Welcome," she said. "I apologize for my lateness. I had some refuse to take out before I could attend." Her eyes never left Preston's face. The silence in the ballroom stretched taut as a piano wire. Vivienne's comment about taking out the refuse hung in the air, a toxic vapor that everyone inhaled, but no one dared to acknowledge. Preston's world tilted on its axis. He blinked rapidly, his brain desperately trying to reject the visual data it was receiving. It had to be a hallucination. A psychotic break brought on by stress and too much cheap champagne. The woman scrubbing his pots and pans this morning could not be the titan of industry, standing 10 feet away, dripping in enough diamonds to buy a small island nation. He looked at her hands. He expected to see red, chapped skin from washing dishes without gloves, a punishment he insisted on because he claimed rubber gloves were an unnecessary expense. Instead, her hands were manicured to perfection, clutching a diamond-encrusted clutch. Vivian didn't move toward him immediately. Instead, she turned to the silver-haired man with the monocle whom Preston had insulted earlier. "Lord Rothschild," Vivian said, her voice like velvet over steel. "I apologize for the mix-up with the Shanghai acquisition. Benedict assures me the paperwork is now in order." The old man, Lord Rothschild, bowed deeply. "Think nothing of it, Madame Sinclair. Your vision for the Asian market is unparalleled. We are merely following your lead." Preston felt the blood drain from his face. Lord Rothschild, one of the 5 richest men in Europe, and he was bowing to Preston's housewife. Grant Holloway, standing next to Preston, took a subtle step away, disassociating himself from the blast radius. Tiffany, oblivious to the shifting tectonic plates of power in the room, tugged on Preston's sleeve. "Preston, why is everyone staring at us? And why does that lady look like your wife? Only, you know, hot." "Shut up here, Tiffany," Preston hissed, his throat constricting. Vivian finished her brief exchange with Rothschild and turned slowly. Her eyes locked onto Preston again. She began to walk. It wasn't a casual stroll. It was an approach. Every click of her sapphire-soled heels on the marble floor sounded like a judge's gavel. The crowd parted further, creating a corridor of humiliation with Preston at the end of it. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. Up close, the transformation was even more terrifying. The cowering posture was gone, replaced by a spine of steel. The dull eyes were now blazing with cold intelligence. "Preston," she said. Her tone was purely transactional. It was the voice she used when deciding whether to liquidate a failing subsidiary. Vivian," Preston stammered, his voice cracking an octave higher than usual. What are you doing here? You're wearing—" He gestured wildly at her necklace. "Is that real?" Vivian ignored the question. Instead, she reached out. Preston flinched, expecting a slap. Instead, her perfectly manicured fingers pinched the lapel of his Brioni tuxedo. She straightened it with a sharp tug, an aggressive maternal gesture that emphasized his childishness. "Did you find the onyx cufflinks okay?" she asked softly. The microphone in her other hand was held just low enough that only those in the immediate circle could hear. "I left them on the dresser, right where you instructed." The banality of the domestic question delivered in the middle of the highest stakes social event of the year was devastating. It reduced him instantly from a high-flying investor to a husband being scolded for incompetence. Yes, I found them," Preston whispered, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air conditioning. "Vivian, what is going on? How did you get in here? You need to leave before you embarrass me." He fell back on old habits, trying to command her, but the words sounded hollow. Tiffany, feeling ignored, piped up, trying to assert her territorial claim. "Excuse me, who do you think you are? This is a private event for VIPs. You can't just walk up to my boyfriend and—" Vivian didn't even shift her gaze. She simply raised one finger, silencing the girl. "Benedict," she said calmly. Benedict, the impeccably dressed man at her side, stepped forward. He held up a tablet, displaying a security photo of Tiffany entering the building. "Miss Tiffany Jenkins," Benedict recited coldly. 24 years old, currently employed as an executive assistant at Sterling Ventures with a salary of $80,000 a year, though payroll records indicate an attendance rate of less than 30%. The red dress you are wearing is a Versace knockoff charged to the Sterling Ventures corporate card yesterday at 3:42 p.m. in Soho. Tiffany gasped, clutching her fake Versace. The surrounding socialites twittered with cruel amusement. "She is irrelevant," Vivian said, dismissing Tiffany as if she were a speck of dust on a lens. Her eyes bored back into Preston. "I'm not here to embarrass you, Preston. I'm here to audit you." "Audit me?" Preston scoffed, trying to regain some footing. "You don't even know how to balance a checkbook, Vivian. I handle the finances. I make the money." A chilling smile spread across Vivian's face. Do you really?" She turned away from him, walking toward the small stage that had been set up for the speeches. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, we have some business to discuss before dinner is served." Preston was frozen. He wanted to run to bolt for the exit, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The security guards at the doors were looking at him now, not with respect, but with the professional vigilance reserved for a potential security threat. Grant Holloway nudged him. "I suggest you sit down, Preston. I think your wife is about to give the keynote address." Numbly, Preston allowed himself to be steered to a table right in front of the stage. It wasn't a place of honor. It was the defendant's chair. Tiffany sat next to him, anxiously checking her phone, likely realizing her sugar daddy was about to go insolvent. The ballroom darkened, save for the spotlight on Vivian. She stood at the podium, a figure of immense authority. "Thank you all for coming," Vivian began. Her voice amplified through the high-end sound system. "We are gathered here to celebrate success, wealth, and philanthropy. The Aurora Group has always operated in the shadows. My father, a brilliant mechanic from Ohio, taught me that real power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to work." Preston's head snapped up. Her father was a mechanic. He hadn't lied about that. But he had assumed the man died poor. "My father also invented a fuel injection component in the late 70s. Vivian continued, her eyes scanning the room. "He patented it. It's currently in about 60% of all combustion engines on the planet. When he passed, I inherited a modest fortune. I turned that fortune into an empire." A murmur went through the crowd. The injection patent. It was legendary among the older financiers. It was the kind of old money foundation that commanded instant respect. For the last 5 years, however, Vivian said, her tone hardening, I have been conducting a social experiment of sorts, a merger, if you will. I wanted to see if a man could love a woman for who she was, not what she owned. So I played a role. I became the simple housewife. I let my husband Preston take the lead. Preston felt every eye in the room swivel toward the back of his head. They burned like lasers. I gave him seed money to start his own venture capital firm, Sterling Ventures, Vivian said. She pressed a button on a clicker. The massive screen behind her, intended to display photos of starving children in need of charity, flickered to life. It displayed a complex corporate flow chart. At the top was Aurora Group. Below it, a dozen shell companies with confusing names like Nebula Holdings and Orion Acquisitions. At the very bottom, feeding off the scraps, was Sterling Ventures. Preston believed he was securing investments from diverse international clients, Vivian narrated dryly. In reality, every single dollar in his firm came from me funneling through these shells. I am his only investor. I am his only client. I am his only source of income. Preston stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. That's a lie. I closed the deal with Tokyo last month. $2 million. Sit down, Preston. Vivian commanded, her voice echoing off the walls. The authority in her tone was absolute. He sat. She clicked the button again. The screen changed to a bank statement. The Tokyo deal, Vivian said. Funded by Orion Acquisitions, my company. You were negotiating with my lawyers, Preston. You thought they were Japanese businessmen because I hired Japanese actors to sit in the room while my legal team did the talking on speakerphone. You were too busy trying to impress them with your watch to notice they didn't understand financial jargon. Laughter rippled through the room. It was a cruel, sophisticated laughter. And speaking of the watch, Vivian said, clicking again. A credit card statement appeared. It showed the purchase of the Rolex. You told your friends you bought this with your bonus. I bought it for our anniversary. You told me it was too flashy and left it in the drawer only to wear it when you went out with your mistress. The screen cycled rapidly now, a montage of Preston's failures and lies. A receipt for the Brioni tuxedo he was wearing paid by an Aurora subsidiary. The lease agreement for his Mercedes guaranteed by Vivian Sinclair. A series of hotel bills for the St. Regis, always booked under Mr. Smith on Tuesday afternoons when he was supposed to be at board meetings. I have spent 5 years subsidizing your delusions of grandeur, Preston, Vivian said, her voice dropping to a quiet, deadly calm. I cooked your meals. I washed your clothes. I let you berate me for not dusting the library correctly, all while I was running a multinational conglomerate from my encrypted phone in the laundry room. She leaned forward over the podium, looking directly at him. You wanted a lioness, Preston. You got one, and you are starving her. She straightened up, addressing the entire room. Tonight was supposed to be Preston's big night. He told me he was meeting serious investors, and he is. She gestured to the tables surrounding Preston. The men and women sitting there, people Preston had assumed were just other rich guests, all turned to face him. Preston meet the board of directors of the Aurora Group, and over there the senior partners of the forensic accounting firm I hired 3 months ago. They have been tracking every penny you embezzled from the company account to fund your lifestyle and your assistant. Tiffany let out a small squeak and tried to scoot her chair away from Preston, but she was boxed in. This isn't a gala for you, Preston, Vivian said, delivering the final blow. This is your performance review, and I regret to inform you that your contract is being terminated effective immediately, with extreme prejudice. The air in the ballroom was no longer filled with the scent of expensive perfume and truffles. It reeked of Preston's desperation. He sat in the chair, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white, resembling the bones of a skeleton. Vivian descended from the stage. She didn't return to Preston immediately. Instead, she signaled to a man sitting at table 4, a table Preston had dismissed earlier, as administrative staff, because they weren't wearing tuxedos. They were wearing sharp grey suits, the uniform of the executioners. Mr. Henderson, Vivian said, her voice projecting effortlessly, without the microphone now silencing the lingering whispers. Would you please walk Mr. Preston through Project Icarus? Mr. Henderson stood up. He was a man who looked like he had never smiled in his life. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and picked up a thick leather folio. He walked over to Preston's table, placing the folio down with a heavy thud that rattled the silverware. Project Icarus, Henderson began, his voice dry and papery, is the internal designation we gave to your file, Mr. Well, we'll get to the name in a moment. It refers, of course, to the man who flew too close to the sun. Preston found his voice. It was raspy, weak. You can't do this. This is entrapment. I demand a lawyer. You have a lawyer, Henderson said calmly. He's sitting at table 9. He works for us. In fact, the retainer you paid him last week that came from the Aurora Group's legal defense fund, which you unauthorizedly accessed. Essentially, you paid your lawyer with your wife's money to defend yourself against your wife. A ripple of dark laughter moved through the room. Preston looked toward table 9. His lawyer, a man named Davis, simply raised a glass of wine in a mock toast and looked away. Henderson opened the folio. Let's discuss the business trips. Shall we? October 14th. You claimed you were in Chicago meeting with the Board of Trade. Expense report filed for $500 for airfare, hotel, and client entertainment. Henderson pulled out a glossy photograph and laid it on the table in front of Preston. This is a photo of you and Miss Tiffany Jenkins at Disney World on October the 14th. You are wearing Mickey Mouse ears. The client entertainment was, according to the credit card receipts, a VIP tour of the Magic Kingdom and a dinner at Victoria and Albert's. Tiffany, who had been trying to shrink into her chair, suddenly went rigid. She grabbed the photo. You said that was a work retreat. You said your company owned part of Disney. He says a lot of things, Vivian interjected smoothly, taking a sip of water from a crystal glass held by a waiter. Continue, Mr. Henderson. November 2nd. Henderson droned on, flipping a page. The Tech Summit in San Francisco, $8,000 billed. However, the GPS tracker on the company car, which you lease but we own, showed the vehicle never left the state. It was parked for 3 days at the Foxwoods Resort Casino. Henderson dropped a stack of casino chips onto the table. They clattered loudly. You lost $7,000 at the roulette table betting on red. It came up black. A metaphor for your life, really. Preston was sweating profusely now. The makeup he wore for the cameras, he always insisted on a little powder before big events, was running down his collar. I was networking. You don't understand how business works, Henderson. You're just a bean counter. I am a forensic auditor for the International Banking Division, Henderson corrected him without emotion. And I have sent men to federal prison for less than what is on page 4. He turned to page 4. Let's talk about the gifts. This is where it gets legally interesting. You see, embezzlement is a crime, but tax fraud, that's where the government gets involved. Henderson pointed a long, bony finger at Tiffany's neck. That necklace, Henderson said. The Cartier diamond pendant. You listed it in the company ledger as computer hardware, server upgrade. Cost $12,500. Tiffany touched the necklace protectively. It's real. He bought it at the Fifth Avenue store. He bought it, Henderson agreed, with a company card registered to a non-profit subsidiary dedicated to feeding orphans in Sudan. Technically, Miss Jenkins, you are wearing the food budget for an entire village around your neck. The room gasped. The cruelty of it was tangible. Tiffany looked down at the diamonds as if they were burning her skin. She fumbled with the clasp, trying to tear it off. Get it off me, she shrieked, throwing the necklace onto the table. I didn't know. He told me he was rich. He told me he was a self-made millionaire. He is self-made, Vivian said, stepping closer. Her shadow fell over Preston. He made himself into a criminal. But the best part, the absolute pièce de résistance, isn't the money, Preston. It's the identity. Preston looked up at her, his eyes pleading. Vivian, don't. Please. Not that. I'll sign anything. I'll leave. Just don't. Vivian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Henderson. Henderson pulled a final document from the folio. It was an old, yellowed piece of paper, a birth certificate. Ladies and gentlemen, Henderson announced to the room, we have been addressing this man as Preston Sterling, a fine aristocratic name. Sounds like old money, doesn't it? Sterling. Solid. Valuable. He held up the paper. But there is no Preston Sterling. Legally, this man changed his name 4 years ago. Before that, he was known as Preston O'Malley, a junior shift manager at a rental car agency in New Jersey who was fired for renting cars to himself on the weekends. The humiliation was absolute. The veneer of the high finance guru wasn't just cracked, it was pulverized. He wasn't a fallen angel. He was a con artist who hadn't even conned anyone successfully except the wife who allowed him to do it. O'Malley, Grant Holloway laughed from the next table. God, that explains the cheap shoes. I always wondered why a sterling wore loafers with rubber soles. Preston O'Malley sat amidst the wreckage of his fabricated life. The sterling facade had been his armor. Without it, he was just a tall, greedy man in a suit he didn't own. Why? Preston whispered, his voice broken. Why did you let me go on this long? If you knew, why didn't you stop me? Vivian leaned down her face, inches from his. The scent of her expensive perfume, jasmine, and oud filled his senses. Because Preston, she whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. I wanted to see how far you would go. I wanted to see if there was any bottom to your greed. And honestly, I was curious if you would ever, even once, say thank you. She stood up straight. You never did. The revelation of his true name seemed to break something fundamental in Preston. The arrogant posture collapsed. He slumped in his chair, a marionette whose strings had been cut. But survival instinct is a powerful drug. As the shock wore off, a feral panic set in. He looked around the room. The exits were blocked by security. The tables were filled with witnesses. He had no allies, except perhaps the one person he had dragged into the mud with him. He turned to Tiffany. She was currently scrubbing her neck with a napkin, as if trying to erase the taint of the stolen necklace. Tiffany, Preston hissed, grabbing her wrist. Tiffany, listen to me. You have to back me up. We can say Vivian approved the expenses. We can say she's lying. She's jealous. We'll sue her for defamation. Tiffany looked at him with a mixture of horror and disgust that was sharper than any knife. She yanked her hand away. Are you insane? She screeched. Her voice, usually a high-pitched coo, was now a shrill weapon. She has the receipts, Preston. She has the bank records. You told me she was a nobody. You said she was a dowdy little housewife who smelled like bleach. She stood up, turning to Vivian. Tiffany knew exactly where the power lay now. She was a survivor, a parasite looking for a new host, or at least a way to avoid being crushed. Mrs. Sinclair, Tiffany cried out, clasping her hands together. I didn't know, I swear. He lied to me too. He told me you were separated. He showed me divorce papers. He said you were just living together until the house sold. Vivian looked at the young woman. Her expression wasn't angry. It was pitiful. Divorce papers? Vivian asked calmly. Did they happen to be drawn up in crayon? He showed me a document. Tiffany insisted, tears streaming down her face. Black mascara tears that stained her cheeks. He said you were crazy. He said he was the one holding the family together. I'm a victim here too. You're a victim of your own stupidity, my dear, Vivian said coldly. But you accepted the gifts. You spent the money. You drove the car. Ignorance is not a defense in a court of law, especially when you're spending the GDP of a small nation on handbags. Vivian snapped her fingers. 2 security guards stepped forward. Escort Miss Jenkins out, Vivian commanded, and hold her in the security office until the police arrive. I believe there are several counts of receiving stolen property we need to discuss with the authorities. No, you can't, Tiffany screamed as the guards grabbed her arms. She kicked and thrashed her red dress, riding up her dignity, vanishing completely. Preston, do something. Tell them, Preston. Preston didn't look up. He stared at the tablecloth, unable to meet her eyes. He let his mistress, the woman he had promised the world to be, dragged away screaming. When the doors slammed shut, the silence returned. Now it was just Preston and Vivian. You really are a coward, aren't you? Vivian said softly. You couldn't even defend her. You used her to boost your ego, and the moment she became a liability, you discarded her." Preston slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed with madness. "You planned this," he spat. The anger was replacing the fear. "You planned this whole night. The gala, the invitation. You set me up." "I invited you to a party, Preston," Vivian replied. "You are the one who brought the audacity." "I made you," Preston suddenly shouted, standing up and knocking his chair over. The violence of the movement caused the nearby guests to flinch. "I made you feel like a wife. I gave you a home. I gave you purpose. Who were you before me? Just some rich girl hiding from the world. I gave you a life." He was gaslighting her in front of 500 people, trying to rewrite reality through sheer force of will. "I managed the house," Preston yelled, his face purple. "I dealt with the contractors. I handled the landscapers. I carried the burden of leadership in our marriage." Vivian laughed. It was a genuine, dark laugh. "You handled the landscapers?" she asked, amused. "Preston, the landscaper, is the head of my botanical research division. He was checking on the rare orchids in the greenhouse. He reported to me every week. He told me you tried to tip him $5 once and asked him to wash your car." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a growl. "And as for giving me a life, I own the mortgage on the house you sleep in. I own the lease on the car you drive. I own the insurance policy on your life. Even the suit on your back. Look at the label, Preston." Preston looked down, confused. He grabbed his lapel. "Brioni." "Look deeper," she said. "The manufacturing tag." With trembling fingers, he checked the inside pocket. There was a small tag below the brand name. "Property of Aurora Costume Dept. Asset number 492. "You're not wearing a suit, Preston," Vivian said, her voice echoing with finality. "You're wearing a costume. I had it sent over from the studio lot this morning. The real Brioni you ordered, I returned it for store credit 3 days ago." A collective gasp went through the room. It was the ultimate emasculation. He was literally a clown in a borrowed suit. "You have nothing," Vivian said, circling him like a shark. "You are nothing without me. You are Preston O'Malley, the rental car clerk who got lucky. And tonight, your luck just ran out." Preston looked around the room, desperate for a lifeline. He saw Grant Holloway. He saw Lord Rothschild. He saw the faces of the elite. "Grant," Preston pleaded, reaching out a hand. "Grant, you know me. We did business. The tech deal. I have skills, I have contacts." Grant Holloway picked up his napkin and dabbed his mouth, looking at Preston with utter disdain. "Preston," Grant said coolly, "the only contact you have is the one currently dismantling your life. If I were you, I'd stop talking. You're only adding years to your sentence." "Sentence," Preston choked out. Vivian signaled to the back of the room. The double doors opened again. This time it wasn't waiters or models who entered. It was 4 officers from the NYPD, followed by 2 agents in FBI windbreakers. "You see," Vivian said, checking her diamond watch, the real one. "While you were playing the big man, Mr. Henderson was filing a formal complaint with the federal authorities regarding wire fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. Since the servers you used crossed state lines, well, it's a federal case now." Preston's knees gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, but he missed the seat and hit the floor with a heavy thud. He sat there on the expensive marble, a heap of borrowed clothes and broken lies. "Vivian," he sobbed, the tears finally coming. "Vivian, please. I'm your husband. We took vows, for better or for worse." Vivian looked down at him. The lights from the chandelier reflected in her eyes, making them look like hard, cold diamonds. You broke those vows the moment you used our joint account to pay for a hotel room with Tiffany," she said. "And as for better or for worse," she leaned down, whispering the final words into his ear, so only he could hear the death knell of his marriage. "You certainly took the better, Preston. Now you get the worse." She straightened up and nodded to the FBI agents. "He's all yours, gentlemen. Please be careful with the suit. I need to return it to the wardrobe department by Monday." The ballroom of the Archdale Hotel, usually a sanctuary of polite whispers and clinking crystal, had transformed into a theater of justice. The arrival of the FBI had shattered the last remnants of social decorum. Two agents, looking like monolithic blocks of granite in their windbreakers, hauled Preston to his feet. He stumbled, his legs refusing to support the weight of his new reality. The man who had walked in expecting to be crowned king was now being handled like hazardous waste. "Preston O'Malley," the lead agent announced, his voice carrying over the silence. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Preston didn't remain silent. He couldn't. "Vivian!" he screamed, straining against the cuffs that bit into his wrists. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'm your husband. You can't let them take me." Vivian stood motionless. She watched the scene with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. She didn't look angry anymore. Anger implied that he still had the power to hurt her. What she looked was relieved. "I am not your victim anymore, Preston," she said, her voice calm and final. "And I am certainly not your savior." As the agents began to drag him toward the exit, the crowd reacted. It started with a few flashes from smartphones, then more. Within seconds, a wall of light erupted. Every socialite, every CEO, every rival investor held up their phone to record the downfall of the fake Mr. Sterling. Grant Holloway stepped into the aisle as Preston was dragged past. He didn't offer a hand. Instead, he held up his glass of champagne. "Nice suit, O'Malley," Grant jeered. "Does it come in orange?" The laughter that followed was brutal. It was the sound of the pack turning on the weak wolf. Preston squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the flashes, the laughter, the ruin. He had spent his whole life terrified of being seen as poor, as lesser. Now he was something far worse. He was a joke. At the massive double doors, Preston dug his heels in for one last desperate attempt. He twisted his head back toward the woman standing alone in the center of the room. "I loved you," he lied, the desperation making his voice crack. "In my own way, I loved you." Vivian didn't shout back. She didn't make a scene. She simply reached up to her neck, unclasping the magnificent sapphire necklace, the heart of the ocean's rival. She held it up, the gems blazing under the chandeliers. "You didn't love me, Preston," she called out, her voice ringing clear. "You loved the reflection of yourself you saw in my money. But the mirror is broken." The agents shoved him through the doors. The heavy wood slammed shut, cutting off his wails. The silence that followed was heavy. The entertainment was over. Now the reality set in. 500 of the city's most powerful people were staring at Vivian Sinclair. They were re-evaluating everything they knew about the quiet woman who had stood in the shadows of a fraudster. Vivian took a deep breath. She smoothed the silk of her midnight blue gown. She turned to Benedict, who was standing respectfully at her side with a fresh glass of water. "Thank you, Benedict," she said softly. "A pleasure as always, madame," the banker replied, Shall I have the orchestra resume in a moment?" Vivian walked back to the microphone. She didn't look tired. She looked energized, as if a heavy parasite had been surgically removed from her spine. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the room, "I apologize for the interruption to your evening. It is never pleasant to take out the trash in formal wear." A ripple of genuine, appreciative laughter went through the room. She had them. She owned the room now, not because of her husband, but because of her strength. However, she continued, her expression sobering, "Let this be a reminder. The Aurora Group stands for integrity. We support innovation, we support charity, and we support truth. We do not support liars. Tonight was about launching our new initiative for transparency in business. I believe I have provided a sufficient case study." She raised her glass. "To the future. May it be bright, may it be honest, and may it be ours. To the future." The crowd roared back, raising their glasses in a toast that felt like a coronation. Vivian sipped her water, the cool liquid soothing her throat. She looked toward the empty doorway, where Preston had vanished. She felt a phantom weight lift from her ring finger. She slid the simple gold wedding band off her hand. She looked at it for a second, a circle of metal that had bound her to a lie for 5 years. She dropped it into Benedict's empty glass. It made a small clink. "Benedict," she said, "donate that to the smelting fund. I believe we can get a few $100s for the gold. We can use it to buy office supplies." "Very good, madame." The music swelled. The gala resumed. But the hierarchy had shifted permanently. Vivian Sinclair was no longer the invisible wife. She was the queen of the board, and she reigned supreme. 6 months later. The visitation room at the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville was stark gray and smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. Preston sat on one side of the thick plexiglass. He looked different. The fake tan was gone, leaving his skin sallow and pale. His hair, once perfectly coiffed with expensive gel, was thinning and limp. He wore a jumpsuit that was a dull, washed-out khaki. He picked up the black phone receiver. His hands shook slightly. On the other side of the glass sat Mr. Henderson, the forensic accountant. He looked exactly the same as he had at the gala grey suit, wire-rimmed glasses expressionless. "Where is she?" Preston asked, his voice raspy. "She said she would come. My lawyer said she would come. Madame Sinclair is currently in Tokyo." Henderson said, his voice tinny through the phone receiver. "She is closing the acquisition of the tech firm you failed to secure. She sends her regards and this." Henderson held up a document against the glass. Preston squinted. It was a finalized divorce decree. "She signed it this morning," Henderson explained. "You get nothing, of course. The prenuptial agreement you signed, which you thought was just standard paperwork for the house deed, was actually quite comprehensive. You forfeit all claims to assets, alimony, and properties." "I have nothing," Preston whispered. "I have no money for the commissary. I need things, Henderson. Toothpaste, soap, protection." "You have a debt, Mr. O'Malley," Henderson corrected him. "The court ordered restitution of $4.2 million. Your wages in the prison laundry, 12 cents an hour, will be garnished to pay that back. By my calculations, you will be debt-free in approximately 4,000 years. Preston slammed his fist against the glass. "This is cruel. She has billions. Why does she care about 4 million? Henderson put the document away and stood up. He looked at Preston with a flicker of something that might have been pity, but was probably just indifference. "It's not about the money, Preston. It never was. It's about the principle. You underestimated her. You thought she was weak because she was kind. You thought she was stupid because she was quiet. Henderson hung up the phone. "Wait!" Preston shouted, his voice muffled by the glass. "Don't leave me here, Henderson." Henderson didn't look back. He walked out of the grey room, leaving Preston alone with his reflection in the glass. A reflection of a man who had everything, threw it away for a cheap thrill and lost to the woman he never bothered to truly know. Outside the prison, a black limousine waited. Henderson climbed into the back seat. Vivian sat there, reviewing a file on her tablet. She looked radiant, wearing a cream-colored business suit. "Is it done?" she asked, not looking up. "It is done, madame," Henderson replied. He signed the final acknowledgement. Vivian turned off the tablet. She looked out the window at the bleak grey walls of the prison. For a moment, a shadow passed over her face, the memory of the love she thought she had. But it passed quickly, replaced by the warm sun of a new day. "Drive," she said to the chauffeur. "We have a gala in Paris tonight, and I hear the diamonds there are exquisite." The car pulled away, leaving the prison and the past in the dust, speeding toward a future that belonged entirely to her. Wow. Talk about immediate karma. Preston thought he was the king of the castle playing checkers, while Vivian was playing 4D chess the entire time. It just goes to show, never mistake silence for weakness, and never ever bite the hand that feeds you, especially if that hand is wearing a $12 million sapphire. Preston learned the hard way that when you build a life on lies, the truth doesn't just hurt. It distorts. He lost his freedom, his dignity, and the best thing that ever happened to him, all because of his own ego. What do you think? Was Vivian's punishment too harsh, or did Preston get exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another story of drama, betrayal, and sweet revenge. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.